The monitoring station's emergency protocols engaged immediately after the attack. Damage control teams in environmental suits rushed through corridors filled with swirling vapor from ruptured cooling systems. The station's massive ring structure, once a perfect circle against the backdrop of stars, now displayed a jagged gap where the communication array had been. Commander Zextroll moved with practiced calm despite the chaos. 3 of his 4 eyes monitored different emergency feeds while the 4th remained fixed on the tactical display where the human vessel's retreat trajectory was plotted in pulsing red. "Analysis complete," announced Sub-Coordinator Vel, her voice harmonics indicating distress despite her professional demeanor. The weaponry was primitive, nuclear-tipped missiles with minimal guidance systems, but the targeting was— She paused, searching for the right term. Surgically precise. Zextroll's scales shifted color slightly, betraying his concern. "Explain." "They didn't target our defense systems or power generators," Vel continued, displaying a 3-dimensional model of the damage. "They specifically targeted long-range communication, while leaving short-range systems intact. They knew exactly what they were doing." The implication hung in the air like a physical presence. This wasn't random aggression or a cultural misunderstanding. The humans had deliberately isolated the station. "What do we know about this species?" Zextroll demanded, addressing the station's knowledge coordinator, who stood nervously by a damaged console. "Very little, Commander. Our deep space monitoring detected their world approximately 30 rotations ago. They call it Earth. Their transmissions suggest a fractured global civilization, technologically primitive but advancing rapidly. They've only recently achieved rudimentary space travel within their own system." "Then how," Zextroll's voice lowered dangerously, "did they reach us here, 12 light jumps from their world?" No one had an answer. In the asteroid field, the Defiant's engines powered down to minimal life support levels. The massive rocks, some the size of small moons, drifted silently around them, occasionally scraping against the hull with muted groans that echoed through the ship. "Maintaining this position for 24 hours as ordered, Captain," reported Lieutenant Hayes from the navigation console, her fingers dancing across holographic controls. "But we're vulnerable here." Captain Reynolds nodded, his weathered face illuminated by the emergency lighting. The bridge crew worked in near silence, the tension palpable. "Engineering reports missile tubes 3 and 4 are depleted," Executive Officer Parker announced, looking up from his tablet. "We have 4 nuclear warheads remaining." Reynolds closed his eyes briefly. Earth's resources had been stretched to breaking point to launch this mission. Every component of the ship, every weapon, every drop of fuel represented an enormous sacrifice. "Begin repairs on all damaged systems," he ordered, "and I want a full analysis of that alien transmission." "Sir," Communications Specialist Rivera interrupted, her voice tight with controlled panic. "We're picking up transmissions from the station to multiple locations. They're using some kind of quantum entanglement communication that bypassed their damaged arrays. They're calling for reinforcements," Reynolds concluded grimly. The tactical display updated, showing probable response vectors based on the limited data they had about the alien civilization. Estimate 12 hours before the first response vessels arrive. Tactical Officer Wilson reported, his expression grim. "Based on the technology we observed at the station, we're severely outmatched." Reynolds stood and walked to the view screen, staring out at the asteroid field that temporarily sheltered them. Humanity's first contact with an alien civilization, and they were already at war. The irony wasn't lost on him. They had traveled all this way hoping to find salvation for Earth, only to potentially bring destruction back to their doorstep. "We need options," he said finally, turning back to his crew. "We can't outgun them, so we need to outthink them." Science Officer Dr. Wong looked up from her station. "Captain, I might have something." The asteroid field contains unusual metallurgical compounds that scatter sensor readings. If we modify our hull plating— Reynolds felt the first stirring of hope. "Make it happen, Doctor. Every minute counts now." As Wong hurried off the bridge, Reynolds returned to his command chair. Earth was counting on them. Not just the mission now, but their very survival. If these aliens traced the Defiant back home before humanity was ready. He pushed the thought away, one problem at a time. Mr. Wilson, plot me every possible escape route from this asteroid field. Lieutenant Hayes, I want to know the structural composition of every rock bigger than a house. It's time to get creative. The crew acknowledged their orders, a new determination replacing fear in their expressions. Outside, the silent stars bore witness to humanity's first steps onto the galactic stage. Uncertain, violent, and desperately improvised. The display showing the embedded code rotated slowly in the air between them, sections highlighted in pulsing red. The bridge crew had gathered in a tight circle around Marcus O'Cuffer's workstation, their faces bathed in the hologram's blue glow. I've isolated the signal component that triggered our defensive systems, Okafor explained, his fingers manipulating the holographic representation. It was buried in what appeared to be a standard electromagnetic broadcast, but contained these data packets. He expanded a section of code that our systems interpreted as targeting sequences. Dr. Wong leaned closer, her analytical mind picking apart the implications. Our defense computers are programmed to respond to any targeting lock with immediate countermeasures. It's standard protocol established after the Mars colony incident. So we fired because our computers thought we were being targeted, Reynolds said slowly, but the aliens might have just been saying hello. The weight of this realization settled over the bridge like a physical presence. Humanity's first contact with an alien civilization, and they'd responded with missiles. There's more, Captain, Okafor continued, his expression troubled. The code doesn't match the rest of the transmission. It's using a completely different syntax structure, like it was added by someone else. Reynolds' eyes narrowed. You're saying their greeting was tampered with? Yes, sir. And very skillfully. I almost missed it myself. Okafor manipulated the display again, separating the components. The base transmission appears to be a standard greeting pattern, repetitive, mathematical sequences common to many human first contact protocols. But these data packets were inserted with surgical precision to trigger our specific defensive algorithms. Lieutenant Commander Parker crossed his arms. That's impossible. Nobody knows our defensive algorithms except Earth Command. Those protocols are classified beyond top secret. And yet, Reynolds gestured at the display. Here they are, embedded in an alien transmission from 12 light-years away from Earth. A heavy silence fell over the bridge. The implications were staggering. Either Earth had a security breach of catastrophic proportions, or something far more complex was happening. Could the aliens have analyzed our systems that quickly? Lieutenant Hayes suggested. Maybe they scanned us and determined our defense protocols in real time. Dr. Wong shook her head. The level of computing power required would be astronomical. And why would they scan us, determine our defense protocols, and then deliberately trigger them? It doesn't make sense. Reynolds paced the small space, mind racing through possibilities. Unless they wanted us to fire first. Unless they wanted this conflict. But why? Rivera asked, voicing the question on everyone's mind. I don't know, Reynolds admitted, but I intend to find out. He turned to Okafor. Keep analyzing that code. I want to know everything about it, where it came from, how it works, and most importantly, who put it there. Okafor nodded grimly. Already on it, Captain. Reynolds moved to the tactical station. Mr. Wilson, what's our status? We've repositioned behind a larger asteroid approximately 3 kilometers in diameter. Its ferrous composition should mask our heat signature for now. Long-range sensors indicate multiple vessels converging on the station we attacked. Reinforcements, Reynolds murmured. How long until they begin a coordinated search? Based on their current movement patterns, I'd estimate 4 hours, Captain. Reynolds nodded, making his decision. We need information. Dr. Wong, can you reconfigure our passive sensors to monitor their communications without revealing our position? I believe so, Captain. especially if I can use what we've learned from the embedded code to help decrypt their transmission protocols. Do it. Mr. Parker, I want all non-essential systems powered down. Minimal life support, emergency lighting only. We need to be a ghost. As the crew dispersed to their stations with renewed purpose, Reynolds remained at the central display, studying the alien code that had triggered this catastrophe. Someone had manipulated them into firing on the alien station. Someone with intimate knowledge of both human and alien systems. Computer, he said quietly, begin recording personal log. First contact scenario has developed complications. We appear to have been manipulated into initiating hostilities with an advanced alien civilization. Whoever is responsible has access to classified Earth defense protocols and alien communication systems. We are currently hiding in an asteroid field with limited weapons and no way to contact Earth for instructions. I am proceeding under Emergency Protocol 7, acting on best judgment to protect both my crew and Earth's interests. If this log is recovered, he paused, considering his next words carefully. Be aware that there is a third player in this game, and they want war. Admiral Kavor stalked the command deck of the Relentless Harmony, his clawed feet clicking against the polished obsidian floor. The ship's sensors painted a three-dimensional map of the asteroid field in the air before him, a swirling chaos of rocks and dust that somehow concealed the primitive human vessel. Impossible, he muttered, mandibles clicking in frustration. They have no cloaking technology, no quantum displacement fields. Their hull is composed of basic alloys that our sensors should detect even through the mineral interference. Senior Tactician Mevrek, her exoskeleton bearing the elaborate etchings of a veteran of 3 border conflicts, approached cautiously. Admiral, I have a theory about their evasion tactics. Kavor turned all 4 of his primary eyes toward her, his secondary visual organs still monitoring the tactical display. Proceed. We're searching using standard Concord protocols, systematic grid patterns, probability matrices based on fuel efficiency and logical escape vectors. She manipulated the display, highlighting their search pattern. But the humans aren't following any recognizable pattern. Look here and here. She indicated several areas where their sensors had briefly detected traces of the Defiant before losing contact again. Kavor studied the points she indicated, his analytical mind seeing the pattern, or rather, the deliberate lack of pattern. They're moving. Randomly. Not randomly. Admiral. Unpredictably. There's a difference. Mevrek expanded the display. I've analyzed their movement against every known tactical doctrine in our database. They most closely resemble ancient aquatic predator hunting techniques from several worlds, including their own. Kavor's interest peaked. Explain. On their world, they have deep-water predators called sharks that use movement patterns designed to confuse prey and other predators. Similar techniques appear in their military history, particularly in conflicts involving submersible vessels. They call it hunt and evade. They're treating this asteroid field like an ocean. Kavor realized, seeing the tactical brilliance behind the seemingly erratic movements. And they're using the natural features of the environment. Radiation pockets, mineral compositions, gravitational distortions, as currents and terrain. Precisely, Admiral. Mevrek looked almost impressed. It's primitive but remarkably effective against our search algorithms, which assume rational, efficiency-optimized movement. Kavor's mandibles clicked in what his species considered laughter. So the answer to finding them is to abandon efficiency. I believe so, Admiral. I recommend reconfiguring our search patterns to mimic their unpredictability. Fight chaos with chaos. Aboard the Defiant, Captain Reynolds peered through a manual periscope extended from the ship's hull, a decidedly low-tech solution in a high-tech conflict. The nearest Concord vessel gleamed in the dim light reflected off nearby asteroids, its hull shimmering with some kind of energy field that reminded Reynolds of oil on water. They're changing their search pattern, he reported, collapsing the periscope. They're adapting. Lieutenant Hayes looked up from her navigation console. How? Our evasion pattern is based on random variables from cosmic background radiation. They can't predict it. They're not trying to predict it anymore, Reynolds replied grimly. They're mimicking it. Look. He activated the main display, showing the Concorde vessel's new movement pattern. They've abandoned their grid search. They're using chaos theory now. Dr. Wong shook her head in amazement. They're learning. Fast. Too fast, Reynolds agreed. Time to change tactics again. He turned to Okafor. Is the mineral coating still masking our signature? Yes, but it's deteriorating. Another 3 hours at most before it degrades completely. Reynolds nodded, mind racing through options. Lieutenant Hayes, plot a course directly toward the edge of the asteroid field. The navigation officer looked up in shock. Sir, that would expose us completely. Exactly. They're looking for us to hide. So instead, we'll run, but not before we create a little distraction. He turned to Wilson at Tactical. Prepare the decoys. I want them deployed in a Fibonacci sequence through the densest part of the field. The drones only have enough power for about 40 minutes, Captain, Wilson warned. That's all we need. We're going to make them think we're attempting to lose them deeper in the field while we make a break for open space. Parker frowned. Once we leave the field, they'll see us immediately. I'm counting on it, Reynolds replied with a tight smile. But by then, we'll have what we need. As the crew prepared for their desperate gambit, Reynolds studied the alien pursuit vessels on the display. Their technology was centuries beyond Earth's. Faster, more powerful, more advanced in every way. Yet here was humanity, holding its own through sheer adaptability and unconventional thinking. They expect us to be afraid, he said quietly, but they don't understand what fear does to humans. It doesn't make us predictable. It makes us dangerous. The Concorde War Council chamber fell into stunned silence as the holographic display updated with the latest pursuit data. The human vessel had somehow managed to evade Admiral Kavor's forces for over 70 hours, an unprecedented achievement for any ship, let alone one with such primitive technology. Supreme Strategist Zelvex, the eldest member of the Council whose translucent skin revealed the complex network of neural enhancements beneath, leaned forward on spindly limbs. This defies all strategic models. How is this possible? Fleet Commander Torek, representing the militant Kelbrid faction, gestured dismissively with an armored appendage. Kavor is being overly cautious. If he would simply saturate the asteroid field with gravimetric charges and risk diplomatic incident with the mining consortiums who have legal claims to those resources, interrupted Trade Minister Quill, her bioluminescent patterns flashing with agitation. This situation is delicate enough without destroying valuable mineral deposits. Zelvex raised a limb for silence. The concerning element isn't Kavor's pursuit tactics. It's what these humans are demonstrating. The display shifted to show intercepted sensor data from the Relentless Harmony. Observe their adaptation rate. The display highlighted multiple instances where the human vessel had modified its systems on the fly, rerouting power, altering its energy signature, even changing the chemical composition of its outer hull to confound sensors. Their neural plasticity allows them to conceive solutions our species would never consider, Zelvex continued. They're using the asteroid field's natural radiation to mask their engines. They've deployed primitive decoys that nevertheless manage to confuse our most advanced tracking systems. And most concerning of all, they appear to be learning our protocols faster than we're learning theirs. Inside the Defiance engineering section, the atmosphere was thick with steam and the acrid smell of overheated circuits. Chief Engineer Okafor moved through the cramped space with practiced ease, directing his team with hand signals as voice communications had become unreliable due to the electromagnetic interference they were deliberately generating. Jackson, reroute auxiliary power through the tertiary cooling system, he ordered, wiping sweat from his brow. Sing, I need that modulation frequency change every 90 seconds exactly. Lieutenant Commander Parker ducked under a hanging cable as he entered engineering. Okafor, The captain wants to know how long before the reflector array is operational. Okafor gestured toward a jury-rigged assembly of components that had no business working together. Parts salvaged from the ship's communication array, a microwave food preparation unit, and what appeared to be the casing from a handheld gaming device one of the crew had brought aboard. 15 minutes if the universe is kind, Okafor replied. The principle is sound. Dr. Wong's idea of using their own scanning beams against them is brilliant, but the execution is. He paused, searching for the right word, improvised. Parker eyed the contraption dubiously. It looks like something my 10-year-old would build. That's exactly why it might work, Okafor replied with a tired grin. No logical species would ever design something this inefficient. But inefficient doesn't mean ineffective. Meanwhile, in a converted storage compartment that now served as the ship's iLab, Jin Park sat cross-legged on the floor, surrounded by holographic displays showing cascading alien code. Captain Reynolds stood in the doorway, watching the young specialist's fingers dance across virtual interfaces. "Tell me you have something," Reynolds said quietly. Park didn't look up, his focus absolute. "I've isolated their primary communication protocols. They're using quantum-entangled particles for instantaneous communication, technology we've only theorized about on Earth. But the encryption..." He paused, a smile spreading across his face. "The encryption is based on mathematical constants. Universal constants. Meaning? Meaning mathematics is the same everywhere in the universe, Captain. Their encryption relies on prime number sequences. Elegant, but predictable if you know what to look for." Park gestured to one particular section of code. "I can't break their encryption entirely, but I can identify command sequences, directional data, tactical orders, enough to give us an edge." Reynolds clasped the specialist's shoulder. "Good work. How soon can you integrate this with our sensor array?" "Already done, sir. We're monitoring their communications in real time now." Park's expression turned serious. "Captain, they're mobilizing more ships. A lot more." Reynolds nodded grimly. "Expected, but not welcome news. Keep monitoring. I want to know the moment anything changes in their communication patterns." As Reynolds left the makeshift iLab, he allowed himself a moment of pride in his crew. Against impossible odds, with severely limited resources and technology centuries behind their adversaries, they were not just surviving. They were innovating in ways that clearly confounded the aliens pursuing them. Humanity's greatest edge wasn't technology or firepower. It was the ability to adapt, to think outside established parameters, to turn disadvantages into strengths. And for now, that edge was keeping them alive. Captain Reynolds studied the intercepted transmission displayed in the air before him, the alien symbols shifting and rearranging as Park's translation algorithm attempted to make sense of them. The message had been heavily encrypted, bounced between at least 6 different relay points, and buried within what appeared to be routine status updates from the Concorde vessels. "You're certain this isn't meant for their other ships?" Reynolds asked, eyes never leaving the display. "Positive, Captain," Park replied, highlighting a section of the code. This signal used a completely different encryption protocol than their standard military communications. And look at the destination coordinates. Reynolds frowned as he examined the data. "That's nowhere near any of their pursuit vessels." "Exactly. This message was directed to a location approximately 2 light minutes from our current position, yet our scans show nothing there." Park manipulated the display, overlaying a sensor sweep of the indicated coordinates. No ships, no stations, nothing but empty space. "Or something our sensors can't detect," Dr. Wong interjected, joining them at the display. "Something using stealth technology beyond even Concorde capabilities." Reynolds' expression darkened. "Can you decode the actual message content?" Park shook his head. "Only fragments. But these symbol sequences here match what we observed in the modified first contact greeting, the code that triggered our weapon systems." A chill ran through the makeshift command center. The implications were clear. Whoever had manipulated them into attacking the Concorde was still out there, still pulling strings. "Lieutenant Hayes," Reynolds called. "Adjust our passive sensors to focus on that empty region. Use the full spectrum analysis Dr. Wong developed." "Yes, sir," Hayes replied, fingers dancing across her console. "This may take a few minutes to recalibrate." Reynolds turned back to Park. "Keep working on that decryption. I want to know what they're saying and who they're saying it to." The minutes crawled by in tense silence, broken only by the soft peeps of the sensor array and the distant hum of the ship's overtaxed engines. Finally, Hayes's console emitted a sharp alert tone. "Captain, I'm detecting something," she announced, voice tight with concentration. "It's shifting somehow. The readings keep changing, like it's constantly altering its sensor profile." "On screen," Reynolds ordered. The main display flickered to life, showing what appeared to be a distortion in space, a rippling, mirror-like anomaly that seemed to bend light around it. As they watched, the distortion shifted, momentarily revealing the sleek outline of a vessel unlike anything they'd seen before, its hull composed of interlocking plates that seemed to move independently of one another. "Some kind of adaptive camouflage," Wong breathed, fascinated despite the danger. "It's reading our sensor frequencies and adjusting in real time to minimize returns." "Can they detect us?" Reynolds asked. "Unknown," Hayes replied. "But they haven't changed course or behavior since we began scanning them." Park's console chimed. "Captain, I've got something from the decryption. It's still partial, but—" He paused, reading the translated text. "This references Phase 2 of something called Operation Discord, and there's a species name that keeps appearing. Nexari." Reynolds turned to Executive Officer Parker. "Run that name through our database. See if it matches anything in the first contact protocols we were given." Parker nodded and moved to a separate terminal. After a few moments, he looked up, face grim. "Nexari, classified threat assessment from Earth Intelligence. Limited information, but they're flagged as an expansion-oriented species denied membership in the Concord 3 standard years ago due to aggressive territorial policies." "That's our third player," Reynolds concluded. "They engineered this conflict, but why? What do they gain by having us fire on the Concord?" The answer came unexpectedly from Rivera at Communications. "Captain, I'm picking up a massive data transfer from the Concord station. We attacked the Nexari vessel. Terabytes of encrypted information flowing between them." Reynolds' eyes widened in realization. This was never about us. We were just the distraction. He turned to his officers, the full picture becoming clear. They manipulated us into attacking the Concord to create chaos, drawing their security forces away from whatever they're really after. "Information," Wong suggested. "Intelligence. Defense plans. And we played right into their hands," Reynolds said grimly. "Well, it's time we changed the game." The meeting site, a hollow chamber carved into an iron-rich asteroid, was illuminated by portable lights from both parties, creating sharp shadows that danced across the uneven walls. Captain Reynolds stood with Lieutenant Wilson and Dr. Wong, all wearing environment suits with magnetic boots that kept them anchored to the asteroid's minimal gravity. Across from them, Admiral Cavor towered over his two subordinates, his exoskeleton gleaming under the harsh lights. "This evidence," Cavor said, his translator rendering his complex vocalizations into stilted English. "How can I trust its authenticity?" The alien's 4 eyes blinked in sequence, a gesture that Reynolds' cultural briefing had identified as skepticism. "You can't," Reynolds admitted frankly, "just as I can't trust that this isn't an elaborate trap. But ask yourself this: why would we request this meeting if our goal was simply to escape or attack you? We've demonstrated we can evade your pursuit when necessary." Cavor's mandibles clicked, the equivalent of a thoughtful hum. A valid point. Yet this claim of Nexari involvement seems convenient. They are known adversaries to the Concord, which makes them perfect suspects, Reynolds countered. "We had no knowledge of the Nexari until we decoded their transmissions. Our civilization isn't aware of galactic politics. We're still trying to solve problems on our own world." Dr. Wong stepped forward, offering a data crystal. This contains everything we've intercepted and decoded. Our methods aren't as sophisticated as yours, but the data is genuine. One of Kivor's officers scanned the crystal with a handheld device, then nodded to the Admiral. Kivor took the crystal, inserting it into a port on his armor. His compound eyes shifted rapidly as he reviewed the data through his neural interface. The transmission patterns are consistent with known Nexari communication protocols, he finally acknowledged. And these data transfer logs. He paused, mandibles clicking rapidly. If accurate, they indicate a significant breach of our secure networks. Which is exactly what the Nexari wanted, Reynolds said. They used us, both of us, like pieces on a game board. They needed a distraction, and what better way than to manufacture a conflict between an unknown species and the Concord? Kivor's posture shifted subtly, a straightening that Reynolds interpreted as alarm. If they have accessed those particular databases, multiple Concord worlds are vulnerable. He fixed his four-eyed gaze on Reynolds. Why bring this to me? Why not simply escape while we pursue this new threat? Because we were manipulated, Reynolds replied, his voice hardening. And I don't appreciate being used. Additionally, if the Nexari were willing to engineer this conflict, they may have further plans involving Earth. My mission is to protect my world, and right now, that means stopping whatever the Nexari are planning. A long silence followed as Kivor studied the human captain. When he spoke again, his translator struggled to convey the complex emotional harmonics in his voice. You are not what we expected, Captain Reynolds. The Concord's preliminary assessment of your species categorized humans as primitive, violent, and driven by simple self-interest. We can be all those things, Reynolds acknowledged with a slight smile. But we're also stubborn, and don't like being manipulated. Kivor produced a sound that the translator didn't attempt to convert, something between a laugh and a war cry. On this, human, we find agreement. He turned to his officers. Prepare a secure channel to the relentless harmony. We will need specialized equipment. Reynolds raised an eyebrow. Does this mean we have an alliance? Not an alliance, Kivor corrected. That would violate numerous Concord protocols regarding pre-FTL species. Consider this, a temporary convergence of objectives. Call it whatever makes your bureaucracy happy, Admiral, Reynolds replied. But we're going to need to move quickly. Based on the transmission patterns we've observed, the Nexari are nearly finished with whatever they're doing. Kivor's mandibles clicked in what Reynolds was beginning to recognize as amusement. You continue to surprise, Captain. Most species would be intimidated to give suggestions to a Concord admiral. Most species haven't spent their entire evolutionary history adapting to survive against all odds, Reynolds countered. Now let's discuss how we're going to catch your thieves. Inside the Nexari vessel, gravity shifted again. One moment Captain Reynolds and his team were advancing down a corridor. The next, they were sliding along what had suddenly become a wall. Wong grabbed a protruding conduit, while Okafor narrowly caught Reynolds by his utility belt before he slammed into a now vertical deck plate. 30 seconds until the next shift, Wong announced, consulting a small device strapped to her wrist. She had programmed it to detect the subtle energy fluctuations that preceded each gravity change. They're cycling faster now. They know we're here, Reynolds concluded grimly. He tapped his communicator. Kivor, status. The Admiral's voice came through with static interference. We've encountered resistance in Section 4. These Nexari are formidable opponents. Reynolds heard what sounded like energy weapons discharging in the background. The Concord troops were heavily armed and armored, but the Nexari home field advantage was proving significant. We're approaching the central data core, Reynolds reported, but these gravity shifts are slowing us down. Maintain your course, Kivor replied. We will continue to draw their security forces toward our position. The communication cut off as the gravity shifted again, this time rotating 90 degrees clockwise. The team had anticipated it this time, bracing against fixed structures until the disorientation passed. I think I can counter this, Okafor said suddenly, examining an access panel he managed to open during a stable gravity period. These fluctuations are coming from localized field generators, not the ship's main gravitational system. Can you disable them? Reynolds asked. Okafor shook his head. Not from here, but I might be able to. He broke off as a section of the corridor ahead of them appeared to ripple, then solidify into 3 Nexari guards. Their elongated bodies were encased in armor that seemed to flow like liquid metal, and their multiple limbs each held different weapons. Down, Reynolds shouted, pulling Wong and Okafor into a recessed doorway as energy beams sizzled past them. The team returned fire with the modified weapons Okafor had provided. Concord particle beams adjusted to penetrate Nexari shielding. One of the guards fell, the others retreating behind their own cover. We need to get past them, Reynolds muttered, assessing the situation. He glanced at his wrist device. Next gravity shift in 15 seconds. Wong's eyes widened with sudden understanding. Captain, I have an idea. She quickly explained her plan. Reynolds nodded and transmitted brief instructions to the others. When the gravity shifted, instead of fighting it, they would use it, timing their movement to coincide with the sudden reorientation. 3, 2, 1. Now, Wong called. As gravity rotated, turning the corridor into a deep shaft, they pushed off from their position. While the Nexari guards struggled against the shift, the human team controlled their fall using the momentum to propel themselves past the defenders. Reynolds fired twice as they passed, eliminating another guard. Landing heavily but safely past the ambush point, they continued toward the central core. How did you know that would work? Okafor asked Wong as they ran. Simple physics, she replied. The Nexari expect everyone to fight against environmental changes, but sometimes it's better to go with the flow and use it to your advantage. They'd reached a massive circular door that pulsed with energy. Beyond it lay the ship's data center, and the stolen Concord information. This is it, Reynolds said. Okafor, can you get us in? The engineer examined the locking mechanism. Their technology is advanced, but the principles are universal. Give me 3 minutes. You have 2, Reynolds replied, taking up a defensive position as alarms began blaring throughout the ship. They know exactly where we are now. In the distance, they heard the distinctive sound of Concord weapons fire intensifying. Okafor and his troops were pushing hard, drawing the main Nexari force away from the core. Almost got it, Okafor muttered, bypassing security protocols with improvised tools and sheer human ingenuity. Just need to. There. The massive door slid open, revealing a chamber filled with swirling holographic data and a single Nexari operator who turned in surprise at their entrance. Don't move, Reynolds ordered, weapon trained on the alien. We're just here for what you stole. The Nexari's multiple eyes blinked in what might have been amusement. Humans, it said, its translator rendering its speech in a melodic tone. Working with the Concord. How? Unexpected. We're full of surprises, Reynolds replied, advancing slowly into the room. Now step away from the console. The Concord High Council chamber fell silent as Captain Reynolds finished speaking. His words hung in the air, simple yet profound against the backdrop of the soaring crystalline architecture surrounding them. The 17 council members, each representing a different advanced civilization, exchanged glances, some using eyes, others sensory appendages that humans had no words to describe. First Speaker Vol, a luminescent being whose body seemed composed of interwoven light, leaned forward. Captain Reynolds, your candor is refreshing. Most species petitioning for Concord recognition present only their achievements, hiding their flaws and failures. Hiding who we are wouldn't serve either of our interests, Reynolds replied. Humans have nearly destroyed ourselves multiple times throughout our history. We've waged wars over resources, ideology, and simple misunderstandings. But each time, we've learned something valuable. And yet, interjected Counselor Dre, a crystalline entity whose thoughts were conveyed through resonant vibrations, This capacity for violence makes some among us hesitant. Your attack on our monitoring station, even if manipulated by the Nexari, demonstrates a concerning readiness to employ deadly force. Admiral Kovor, standing to the side of the human delegation, stepped forward. His once pristine ceremonial armor now bore battle scars from the Nexari confrontation. If I may address the Council, I have fought alongside these humans. Their capacity for violence is matched only by their capacity for cooperation and adaptation. When faced with an enemy that outmatched them technologically, they relied on creativity and unpredictable thinking, qualities our own forces could benefit from. Murmurs rippled through the chamber as council members conferred privately. Executive Officer Parker leaned close to Reynolds. "I think we're winning them over," he whispered. Reynolds wasn't so sure. The divisions among the council were evident. Some representatives clearly intrigued by humanity, others wary or openly hostile. Second Speaker Morrow, whose species resembled Earth's cephalopods, manipulated a holographic display. The Nexari data theft was more extensive than initially reported. Had Captain Reynolds and his crew not intervened, 17 Concord worlds would have been vulnerable to targeted attacks. This service cannot be dismissed. Nor can we dismiss the possibility that humanity itself poses a future threat, countered Counselor Jen, a collective intelligence represented by a swarm of tiny hovering Orcs. Their unpredictability, while valuable against the Nexari, makes them fundamentally incompatible with Concord stability. Reynolds stepped forward again. "Counselors, if I may, we came to space not to conquer or threaten, but because our world faces challenges we haven't solved yet. We need allies, yes, but we also have something to offer in return. Our different perspective. Our unpredictability, as you call it, helped uncover a threat your standard protocols missed. Perhaps there's value in difference." The first speaker's luminescence brightened, an indication of interest. "What exactly are you proposing, Captain?" "A partnership that acknowledges both our limitations and our potential," Reynolds said. "Earth isn't ready for full Concord membership. We recognize that. But we can learn from each other. You have technology and knowledge we need. We have adaptability and perspective you might find valuable." The council withdrew for deliberation, leaving the human delegation waiting in an antechamber overlooking the vast spiral of the Concord capital city. Dr. Wong stood at the viewport, watching ships of countless designs moving through designated flight paths. "It's beautiful," she said quietly. "All these different species coexisting, building something greater than any could achieve alone." Reynolds joined her. "Let's hope they see a place for humans in that picture." Hours later, they were summoned back to the council chamber. The first speaker's announcement was brief but historic. The Concord extends developing member status to Earth, with technological and humanitarian assistance to be provided under supervision. In exchange, human advisors will train Concord tactical teams in adaptive thinking protocols. A cultural exchange program will be established to facilitate mutual understanding. As the humans prepared to return to the Defiant, Admiral Kovor approached Reynolds. "Your ship will be escorted back to your world by my vessel. I have been appointed liaison to Earth, a position I requested." Reynolds raised an eyebrow. "I thought humans were too unpredictable for your liking." Kovor's mandibles clicked in what Reynolds now recognized as laughter. "I have served the Concord for 3 centuries, Captain. In all that time, nothing has challenged my thinking like 4 days pursuing your vessel. Perhaps it is time for some unpredictability in my life."